Hi, I'm going to introduce epochal signatures for deniable group chats. This is joint work with Andreas Hülsing. Nowadays, a lot of communication is moved online. However, some of the properties of offline communication are not necessarily preserved that way, and one of those properties is sometimes deniability. Deniability is the notion that whatever I say in a communication cannot be later on proven against me that I said it, or for that matter, even that I participated in that communication. There is an argument to be had on whether this is a desirable property. However, losing this property means that the desirable notion of an offline communication and an online communication behave in the same way no longer applies. The reason why this is desirable is that this makes for a very easy to explain security model that even lay people can understand. Now, deniability has been around for a while as a notion, and for two-party chats this is mostly a solved problem. The core idea there is to use message authentication codes to sign messages, and then the receiver of a message can, after verifying that the MAC checks out, conclude that only the supposed sender and I know the key for this, and I know I did not create that message, therefore it must be from the sender. This no longer applies for more than two parties, since then more than one possible sender is left after the check. So this becomes a much bigger problem for larger groups. Now, something can still be done with pairwise communication there, and especially if later on it's verified that this communication was the same for everyone. However, this does no longer scale very well, in that the larger the group, the more communication overhead this enforces. Other techniques exist, they usually have other downsides in other areas. And we are trying to find something that presents a better trade-off for many applications. Now, before I continue, I should point out that in this work we are only focusing on the technical aspects of deniability. There are also the social aspects with regards to whether this is a desirable notion. However, we leave those to the social sciences. Also, there are more practical considerations that need to be taken into account, such as that if you implement a scheme that's supposed to be deniable, your distribution should always come with a tool that allows the creation of fake transcripts in order to provide actual deniability instead of just the theoretical possibility that a cryptographic protocol implies. Instead of looking into these things, we do, however, provide a formal security model for offline deniability, which to our knowledge in this form is a first. We don't claim originality on most of the dimensions of deniability, but we are not aware of a formal model in the sense of a security game for these notions. Secondly, we introduce epochal signatures, which are a useful tool with which many non-deniable existing schemes can be turned into deniable schemes. Particularly this applies to many group chats. Now, deniability is usually defined by saying there should be a simulator that's efficient, that can create fake transcripts that some judge can then not distinguish from real transcripts. Now, the question, of course, is from where should the exact content of what is going on come. Usually we want that this applies for arbitrary interactions, and so the way this is normally modeled is by having the judge choose the interaction that she then has to distinguish, which is how we model this here. Then there's usually a question of corruption. In our case, we essentially give all the secrets to the judge and say even full corruption of all involved parties should not remove deniability here. Lastly, there's often a question of adaptive attacks. In this work, we only focus on offline judges, that is, judges that receive transcripts after their completion instead of live. Online judges who could do adaptive attacks are a much more difficult beast, and their applicability in practice has been questioned before. And they are very hard to deal with, and as such, we focus on the more established offline judges here. To give some intuition for our game, as I said, the judge outputs some instructions that should be executed, and this is done in the form of a so-called instruction list. An instruction in an instruction list is essentially something like saying, at this point Alice should send a message foo to some chat room bar. And a long list of all these instructions is then the instruction list. Each instruction is additionally marked as either exposed, challenge, hidden, or alternate reality. And to give some intuition, despite the scenario maybe not being that realistic, let's look at the following example. Say there is a police officer who, during his office hours, participates in a certain chat room and creates his transcript of that room. The judge will later on trust that transcript as real, since the police officer will be considered a neutral party in the dispute in question later on. Now, outside of the police officer's office hours, so when there's no trusted transcript, there are some disputed interactions between parties that become the subject of a legal case, where the accusing party says, this is what happened, these guys are evil, and the other party say, this is totally not what happened. These are the challenge actions. Challenge and exposed actions may be separated by actions for which there is no transcript provided to the judge. These are the so-called hidden actions. They are essentially just no one trustworthy has a transcript for that part. Lastly, in case the challenge actions are indeed simulated and someone is trying to frame other people, there may have been other things that occurred during that time in the real world. These are what we call the alternate reality actions. And a judge will at the end of the day have to decide whether the transcript of the exposed and the challenge actions is either completely real, or whether the transcript of the exposed action is real, the transcript of the challenge actions is simulated, and the alternate reality actions are what actually happened. Now, there is one kind of attack that in many schemes is very hard to prevent. And that is, there might be some state in the protocol that is preserved among successive actions. This might, for example, be some form of an ephemeral key used to encrypt some messages. If this state is preserved between exposed and challenge actions and is used in such a way such that a judge can detect whether these keys match, or these states match, then this allows for the trivial attack. The judge simply checks whether the values between the exposed and the challenge actions are compatible. And while a simulator might be able to sample these ephemeral states in a way from the same distribution, resulting in information theoretically indistinguishable values, since the judge knows the true value, there is an overwhelming probability that the judge can tell the difference, since the values will, with an overwhelming probability, be equally distributed but different. And in order to prevent this attack, we will usually have to restrict what kind of instruction lists the judge can output as a challenge. Now, the strongest notion in this framework is what we call strong offline deniability. And this is essentially the notion where we say there simply must not be any such preserved state, and the judge can output whatever consistent set of instructions she wants. This is an extremely strong notion, and we conjecture that it is incompatible with certain other desirable security notions like post-compromise secrecy if an efficient protocol is desired. So efficient in the sense means a protocol that does not require things like linear length messages in the number of group members. Now, this of course rules strong offline deniability out for many chat protocols that consider efficient scaling and these other security properties. And the other extreme that we therefore might want to look at is weak offline deniability, where we essentially say you simply are not allowed to have weak and exposed and challenge actions in the same chat room. Now this is a rather weak notion, since, for example, it's not allowed for a police officer to go into the chat room 2 weeks later, chat with someone and take a transcript home from there. And since this is not possible, this security notion might often not be applicable in practical settings. So what we want here is something in between these notions that's stronger than weak offline deniability but still efficiently achievable. And this is where we get to hidden full interactions. Now, a full interaction is simply a set of successive actions during which every party that is a member of a chat room does something. Usually it will be sending a message, it might also be joining or leaving, it might be getting kicked. Now, once every member of a chat room has done something like that, we say that these actions together form a full interaction. And a hidden full interaction is then simply a full interaction that consists completely out of hidden actions, so the judge does not receive any transcript from them. And this then induces the security notion of hidden full interaction offline deniability, which is such an intermediate notion as I said we wanted. And there the statement is essentially that you can have challenge and exposed actions in a chat room as long as they are always separated by such a hidden full interaction. Now, hidden full interactions are actually similar to many of the conditions under which post-compromise secrecy re-establishes secrecy after a key compromise becomes undone. So in that sense, this is also a condition that many of you may be familiar with. And most importantly, for our purposes here, hidden full interaction offline deniability, or HFI offline deniability, is efficiently achievable, and we will look into why soon. Before that, however, let's take another look at the properties that we would like to have from group chats. First of all, there is authenticity, and in most scenarios this simply is not a notion that's up for debate. However, if we are willing to sacrifice this, the other two become trivially achievable. The second one is efficient scaling, so having a protocol that stays efficient if you have many members and in a chat room. And one protocol that targets these two things is messaging layer security, or MLS for short, that says we want to enable groups with thousands of members, and so we are willing to sacrifice deniability for this purpose. And this is what MLS does, and does so very well. On the other hand, we also want deniability, usually, at least if you are in this talk. And there are some protocols that are willing to sacrifice the efficient scaling property for this. One example would be Signal, who has linear length messages in the number of members of a group. For Signal, many groups are like 10 or 20 members, and there this linear length doesn't really hurt, since the factor is also rather small. However, for something like MLS, this is of course completely unacceptable. Now, what we are trying to provide is something that unites all these three properties, and in fact, if you use MLS together with our epochal signatures that we'll get to now, you actually unite all these three properties. Now, epochal signatures on a very high level are signatures with an expiration date. Before that date, they behave like completely regular signatures, and afterwards they are easily forgeable or simulatable, as we say. Now, this is essentially the opposite of forward secure signatures. A forward secure signature, in case the secret key gets corrupted, all future signatures are insecure because everybody who has the secret key can forge them. But all past signatures remain still valid, since the secret key does not allow to create those past signatures. What we do for epochal signatures is pretty much we use this and turn it around, which can be done efficiently with pebbling schemes. And in addition, to ensure that these now partial secret keys are always available when they're supposed to be, we ensure that each signature that's created comes with two additional pieces of information. First of all, it contains the secret key for the least recently expired epoch, so that all expired signatures can immediately be simulated using that secret key. It also contains the secret key of the current epoch, and but locked behind a time lock puzzle. This prevents the creation of valid forgeries, since breaking the time lock puzzle is supposed to take longer than the validity period of the current secret key. But afterwards it becomes soon possible to create those then expired signatures. I should mention, we think of one epoch as a time period of like 5 minutes, and a small number of epochs is the validity period of a signature. And with this, we can then go on to replace signatures in many existing schemes, including group chats. And in our paper, we proved that a large class of group chat protocols, including MLS, can be made HFI offline deniable simply by replacing the signatures with epochal signatures. Another use that was pointed out to us during the review process is deniability for DKIM signatures in the email setting. DKIM signatures are another example for something where signatures were used to achieve authenticity, but introduced more properties than just that authenticity, including the verifiability by other parties much later on that are not the supposed receivers. Again, this is one of those discussions that is social, whether this is a good thing, but it is not what was intended, and by using epochal signatures, we get the properties that DKIM signatures introduced back down to pretty much just the authenticity that was desired without introducing this independent verifiability later on. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm now available for questions.